for your film selections. It was such a pleasure and a really fascinating experience for us to discover the films that you selected to be screened alongside expats, and at this moment when we're all in the midst of discovering expats. So I hope we can get to that a little bit later in the Q&A, some of your film selections. But in the meantime, let's start with expats. To kick things off, could you speak a bit about your relationship to the source material and what drew you to the project initially, what your response to the novel was as a novel, and how you approached the challenge of adapting it for a serial format?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. Yeah, I read the novel and loved the way that it was non-linear. I loved that it was so nuanced and textured and all these layers, and it felt like it was an exploration of character, which is what I love about television as well. Like, I love diving into character, and I love when you watch something or you read something and it feels like you're pulling back the layers of an onion, as opposed to just being on a train that's headed in a direction. And so I think that was the challenge, was to see if I could make the series also, translate like all of those layers and texture and have it feel as nuanced.
I alluded in my introduction to the choice to exhibit the 5th episode. Rather than starting at the beginning of the limited series, you decided to exhibit theatrically the feature-length 5th episode, Central. And I will say, I saw Central before I had seen any other episodes. And I know that some of our audience is caught up and has seen the previous 4 episodes, or maybe some selection of them. And others, I think, are experiencing the series for the first time. Could you speak about what your ambitions were for this episode and the choice to sort of present it as a departure from the narrative flow of the rest of the miniseries, while also very much embedding it within that narrative and sort of opening up the narrative through this different perspective?
Yeah, I think that first of all, what I wanted to do with this episode was to show that there were 2 ways into this world, and it was very experimental. I pitched it just kind of like, well, Nicole said I could do anything. So, let's, really, have some fun. And so, even just me teasing the idea that we were going to do an episode where she was not the main character, just to see how she would respond. And she was like, I love that. And that was really exciting, and telling it to the studio, they were a little bit more trepidatious. But I think that, I wanted to show that there were 2 doors, kind of like if you've seen the rest of the series, you see the main entrance and then you see this other door. And for me, it was really personal, because I think in my lifetime, people who met me when I was an immigrant and I was a kid, and they knew me in a very different way, and then people who meet me now and see me in a position that's much more privileged, and I spent most of my time with privileged Western Hollywood people, and it's sort of like, well, you don't know everything about me, you don't know everything about these characters. I'm no scholar of Hong Kong, but I think what I find and have always found really fascinating about the place is first of all, the fact that Hong Kong has never, or for a very long time, not belonged to itself. And it's this identity crisis that is a parallel to many people, individuals in diaspora. And I think that's why people relate so much to the plight of Hong Kong, because after the handover from, so there's colonialism, and then it's like, now there's China, and it's this question of like, who does it belong to? What is Hong Kong? Who are Hong Kongers? And that struggle for identity is something that I really related to. And being from Beijing, like my family and I left in 1989 during Tiananmen Square, and so there's obviously that parallel as well. And so it was just, for me, about ultimately, it's a place where there's an intersection of so many different types of people, as you mentioned, like class and race, East and West. And I think that that's interesting to me because it's kind of how I've grown up. Like, I've always had this intersection of all these different cultures. But ultimately what I'm trying to say, and particularly at this moment in time, I think, in the world, is that there's a lot of tribalism. And so there tends to be a lot of moral value, like, assigned to, like, class and race and all of these things. And ultimately what I wanted to show was that these are all people. These are all humans, regardless of where you're from and, what your privileges are. And of course we can, we can analyze and we can examine privilege and what that affords people and how they might behave and ways in which we're all ignorant, particularly people who live in a bubble and aren't wealthy and are privileged. But at the end of the day, it was important that they also deserve some level of empathy because, these are all human beings. Well,
It's kind of remarkable what you've done, I think, in terms of building an ensemble of characters. Obviously it's adapted from a novel, and so there's sort of a novelistic approach to fleshing out this rich ensemble of characters that's also in conversation with the very sort of cinematic qualities that you're bringing to the formal presentation of these characters, and how you're introducing a character matters, and how you're what we learn from them and when matters. And I wonder if you could just speak about sort of building that ensemble for the cinema in terms of both casting, how you cast the leads and the characters in this episode in particular who come to the fore where they may not have been leads elsewhere in the series.
Yeah, I think that a lot of times I'll make things because I have a question, and then I'm like somehow trying to answer that question. And so for this series, in addition to all the thematic questions that I had, I was also asking, like, what is the difference between film and television, right? Like, as a filmmaker today, like, should I make film? Should I make television? Okay, if you get theatrical screening, then it's a film, but a lot of times it's a very short run, and then it ends up on the same screens anyways. And so what is film, what is television? I don't have an answer, but I think that I was trying to, I didn't change my process at all in how I made this entire series versus how I made The Farewell, for example. My entire collaborators, my cinematographer, my production designer, we worked in exactly the same way on a much more elevated, scaled up level. And so for casting, it was the same. With The Farewell and on this, we had both an American casting director as well as international. And so we worked with a local casting director in Hong Kong who cast also out of Manila to find Ruby Ruiz. So it's always this very international process and just finding who's best for the role. And the consideration for this is, of course, we have Nicole Kidman, and then we have all these actors who have never acted before. For example, like Amelin Pardinian, who plays Puri. She's a singer in Hong Kong and has never acted before. And then we have Brian T, Starry Blue, who have done a lot of network television, and Starry who's done a lot of like comedy, like 30-minute comedies. So it was just both challenging and also really exciting to have people from all these different worlds and different experiences, and working with them to make sure everybody felt like they were in the same film.
I think that diversity of experience parallels the sort of diversity of environments and communities that the show studies and observes. And I'm curious as to your research process. How did you develop these depictions of these very specific and distinctive sort of social groups, both whether Margaret and Hilary's world or Essie and Puri's professional milieu or Mercy's own, social world? Was there a research process?
For sure, yeah. I mean, obviously watching a lot of films, documentaries, reading things. There's a lot of articles, a lot of podcasts, and then just being on the ground, talking to people. I have friends and family there. I have expat friends and local friends. And then with the expat friends, I ask them, do you have a helper that would be open and, interested in talking to us? And so we went to a lot of people's houses, a lot of expats' houses, and looked at just looked at like how the layout of, for example, of the apartments. And one thing we learned, for example, is that every relatively, even like not super luxury, like I would say like middle class like apartment, they have built in like quarters, like a section, like for live-in help. And that was something that was really astounding to me, because that's not something that I'm used to. People had seen, the writers had seen The Farewell, and I was like, well, this tone I think is going to be different. I want there to be mystery and intrigue. And so we looked at Mother by Bong Joon-ho as like a kind of what love, that maternal love, can drive you to do. And that is, I think, we looked at a lot of films that were on the borderline, that almost felt like genre, or they used genre elements but weren't necessarily genre. A White Day was recommended by Hilnor Palmer, was recommended by Anna, my cinematographer, and that was actually Hilner's directorial debut, and I just found it to be so confident, and we really had talked about how to, because it's such an emotional story, we didn't want it to feel sentimental. That was really important to us. We looked at Nashville, and I'm trying to remember the rest of the list, but
Don't Look Now is one.
Don't Look Now is another one that's like that. It's a genre film that's kind of genre, but, or a lot of, it's a classic that people draw from all the time now in terms of visual imagery and how striking that is. And then also we wanted to make sure we still kept, what I love about storytelling, which is being able to do drama alongside the comedy and having light moments and having a lot of warmth still. And I think Nashville has such a lively tapestry of characters, and there's just so much love for these characters, and the backdrop of music, the political backdrop, and also that you just kind of get lost watching it. It's not like you know exactly where you're going. It's also a lot longer than this, but you watch it and hopefully you just kind of get absorbed into the world, as opposed to being like, okay, what's going to happen next and next, and it's just about these people's lives. And then, some of the docs, of course, Joshua, which is about the student protesters, and The Helper, which, we used obviously a lot for this episode, and Don't Cross That Bridge, My Love. Don't Cross That Bridge, My Love was something we just watched to remember the heart and soul of, what these stories are about. And sometimes we can go down this road where we're writing like drama and thriller and horror and these like dark elements, and you kind of forget the softness. And so we just wanted to remember always to have these moments where you remember why, for example, Clark and Margaret, they really love each other, even though they're in this really terrible thing, that there's warmth in these families and in some of these characters.
Although the series is ending today, I hope that if your interest is piqued and you're absorbed in Expats, you can go to our website and find a list of films that Lulu selected and maybe seek some of them out. Many are, available for home viewing if you know where to look. But I want to open it up to the audience now. We have a mic that will be running.
I wanted to ask, in regards to both Farewell and Expats, you deal a lot with how people engage with grief and grieving. I was wondering, as a writer, as well as a filmmaker, how do we engage with our own personal grief and translate that into what we do as an art form?
Oh, that's a very deep question. I think I'm still trying to figure that out. But I think it's just all behavior, you know, and on some level, whether we like to admit it or not, we all relate to all of these characters in some small way. And I think, or you have to at least, you know, and I think that grief is interesting because it can make you be the best version of yourself, or it can make you be the worst version of yourself. And in a way, like loving these characters and giving them grace to behave the way that they do is also giving grace to yourself. And to say, oh, you know, so maybe, well, I don't want to have any spoilers, but some of these characters behave very badly, not just in this episode. And it's like, well, maybe, you know, I've done that too, right? Like, I've accidentally been rude to somebody because I, you know, am struggling with a loss or grief or something that has overtaken me. And then you're really hard on yourself. But it's like, you know, we're all human. So I think that's the process that it taught all of us, like the writers and I, as we were writing through this. It's like, oh God, yeah, I've done that. It's so embarrassing. All right, let's give that to this character.
Thank you for coming here. I just want to ask, one of your responses, you said you were visiting homes that had like accommodations built for like live-in help. It reminded me of an answer you gave, I think at an interview with NPR a few years back about how you started your career making filming these like day in the life of videos for injury victims, for like court cases, mediation. You would visit people in their homes, get them to open up, and kind of, you know, produce these short films about them. Do you think that process sort of influenced how you approached this episode, like how you shot it, or how you did the research for it, or both?
Oh, that's interesting. I haven't thought about that, but I'm sure it has. You know, just like going into, I think both like that job and also just always feeling like you're a guest somewhere. You know, like that's what at least my immigrant parents are like. You're a guest in this country, so you have to, you know, be a certain way or behave well or whatever. But I think that, yeah, that experience definitely taught me a lot about empathy and how to get people to open up and how to disarm them. Because with that job, it was like a lot of lawyers, and that they were used to dealing with all these like men in suits, and it's hard to like for them to open up, and a lot of them had never like been in that world before. And so for me, and I think that's where, you know, I'm 5 foot tall, and you know, I am who I am, and so I would intentionally lean into that. I would come in and just be like, forget about the lawyers, and just talk to me, tell me what's going on. And so I do that a lot here too, like even going to a lot of the Filipino community and saying, hey, this is the storyline, this is what I'm trying to do, but I want to make sure I'm doing it as accurately as possible, so I want you to take control and take authority of this story.
My question was mainly in terms of adapting the novel. I'm unfamiliar with the source material, but I was very curious in how, when you were writing the teleplay for the show, especially in this episode, you see these characters as something, they're all desperately searching for something. How important was it for you to subtly show love as something they need, but more so through the lens of something as love being transactional?
Oh, interesting. How it is transactional, or they need it to not be transactional?
Or more so just how it can come off as transactional, especially for the characters who are mainly the help. You know, you talk about class, and to them, it's very, I thought, is something like, well, they're my friend, they're caring, but you know, you're being warned, they are your boss, and there's certain boundaries, and how at the end they ultimately do not care, you're their employee.
Yeah, definitely. That was something that we talked about a lot developing the script, was just like, whose perspective are you in? Because I fully believe that Margaret thinks that Essie is family. And you'll keep watching hopefully the next episode. But I think that's the gray area, right? Is like who has the privilege of thinking in that way and who doesn't, because there is a power dynamic whether or not these employers like it or not, and it's their own way. I think it's also a very Western thing of like, this is how I'm gonna like calm my own guilt. There's this like Western Christian ideology that they're bringing in of like, well, we're not bad people, right? This is just the system. And I heard that so much when I was in Hong Kong. It's like, well, this is normal here. We wouldn't, of course, I know this looks bad in the States, but here, this is like, actually, this room is so much better. You should see how other people's helpers' rooms are, so there's that like trying to make themselves feel more easy about these decisions.
I noticed a big difference in the adaptation here is that there's a lot more time spent on giving the character of David like agency and development. Could you speak on why you chose to do that?
Well, I think I wanted to make sure we were giving, we were like treating the men fairly. I'm very much about fairness, even though life isn't fair. But we wanted to make sure all the men weren't just bad, and I think that because David is the closest to a villain in this, and he makes a lot of bad choices, but I wanted to make sure he was still empathetic. I also think that when we started shooting the coffee scene, I couldn't stop. And they were like, we've now spent 2 days shooting this man carrying a coffee machine. And I was like, but it's so funny. It's going to make the whole series. And the producers were like, but this is a show about these women, and he doesn't really have a storyline. It's just him and the coffee machine. I was like, yes, but it's so good.
It says so much also about his character.
It does, right? About men sometimes. Sorry. But it's charming.
Your rehearsal methods with all these actors, especially because they come from different backgrounds and different levels, and also non-actors. How did you approach the rehearsals usually?
Well, we didn't have a lot of time for rehearsals, and I like having rehearsals. I've yet to get it in my career because it costs time and money, and oftentimes you just don't have that as a luxury. But I think that I would encourage certain actors to spend time together, like Clark, and so Nicole and Brian. I would tell them to spend as much time as they could together, and the kids, so that they really felt like they were bonded, and that was important for all of them as well. And then I told certain other people to stay away from each other. I told Nicole and Ji-young, who plays Mercy, to not really know each other, so that when they met on set, and I think the first scene that they shot together was at the night market. That's a spoiler. Sorry. Was when Gus goes missing. It's the scene where Gus goes missing. And so they really didn't know each other, and I think that sense of them being strangers and this massive thing happening really comes through. And then I think the most rehearsals that I did was with the Filipino community, these women, just because there is this sort of liveliness and it has to feel really lived in. And so we actually did do a rehearsal where they helped, where, they're talking on top of each other, and they would all argue, no, we wouldn't say it like this, how about we say it like this? And that was so great, and I was just couldn't take notes fast enough, and we had a translator and a consultant, so that scene just kept developing as they rehearsed it because of the